In this section, we're going to be talking about plant and bacterial cells. So for the most part, plant cells are relatively similar to animal cells. There are a couple key differences, and then bacteria cells as prokaryotes are very simplistic. So we'll take a look at that as well. So with a plant cell, okay, obviously you have a lot of the same features as you do in an animal cell. You have your nucleus, you have your rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulums, you have your Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, you also have a vacuole, mitochondria, so on and so forth. But there are a couple differences that you should be able to spot right away. First up, you do have a cell wall. Okay, so you can see the cell wall is kind of this orangish colored structure on the outside of the cell. And then you also have your chloroplast. And your vacuole is one large thing instead of multiple little ones. So looking into this, plant cells have two additional organelles. The cell wall, it is for rigid support of the cell. It generally gives it a relatively rectangular shape to it, to the cell. Now, because the plant cells do have this cell wall, they do still have a membrane, a cell membrane. It's just on the inside of the cell wall. Okay, so the cell wall is on the outside, then you have your plasma membrane, and then the cytoplasm with all the rest of the organelles. Okay, whereas in the animal cell, you just have the plasma membrane and then the cytoplasm inside of it. Right? You also have chloroplasts. So chloroplasts are actually incredibly similar to mitochondria. It's just they kind of do the reverse process that mitochondria do. So mitochondria basically take stored energy in the form of glucose and convert it into usable energy in the form of what's known as ATP. Chloroplasts will actually take solar energy and convert it into stored chemical energy, such as glucose. Okay, so you do have your chloroplasts here. These have a double membrane. Okay, so they have the outer organelle membrane, and then they also have the inner membrane, just like the mitochondria. Now, because plant cells have chloroplasts does not mean that they don't have mitochondria. They still need to be able to use that chemical energy that it's creating. Okay, it's just where animal cells can't create glucose, plant cells can. Okay, they can create that stored chemical energy and then go ahead and use it to create usable energy in the form of ATP. And then there is another difference with plant cells versus animal cells. You do have the central vacuole. Okay, so animal cells have a bunch of smaller vacuoles. They're slightly different from vesicles. Okay, remember vesicles are used more to transport things around the cell. They fuse with the cell membrane, they fuse with the Golgi apparatus, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, so on and so forth. Vacuoles are mainly just used for storage. So they will store water and other nutrients that the cell has. The central vacuole in a plant is the only vacuole that is found in a plant cell, and it's huge. So you can see it actually takes up most of the space inside the cell. And then that is where the cell will store its water. Okay, because it needs water in order for the chloroplast to work. And we'll get into all of that later. But the central vacuole is also used to give the cell rigidity. So you have the cell wall that does some of that. Okay, it is very rigid on its own. But if you have the cell wall surrounding something that is deflated, a cell that's deflated, then the cell wall won't be able to continue to hold its rigidity. Now, the central vacuole holds a bunch of excess water, and so that keeps the cell rigid. It gives the cell its basically inflated properties so that the cell wall can actually give that rigid support. And that's why plants will droop if they start to lose too much water, because they don't have that support of the central vacuole. Alright, so those are the differences between plant and animal cells. Now we've got bacterial cells. So this is really simple, okay? Bacterial cells do have their plasma membrane. Okay, you can see that's the kind of yellow layer here. They do also have a cell wall, though it is incredibly different from the plant cell wall. It's not rigid, it's just kind of there as an extra layer of protection. And then they can have a capsule on the outside, which is even more protection and also used kind of to hold the pili, the pilus is singular here, which allow for movement in the cell. They can also have what's known as a flagellum, which is this long tail, which is also used for movement. And then you've got your cytoplasm on the inside, your DNA, which is just kind of all jumbled up together inside the middle of the cell. And then they do also have ribosomes. So ribosomes is one of those, or ribosomes are one of those kind of weird things where they technically are an organelle, but they're also technically not. Okay, they are used to produce the proteins inside the cell, but they are not membrane-bound organelle, a membrane-bound organelle. Okay, and we'll see more what they look like later, but they are made of just RNA and proteins. Okay, so there is no membrane around them, which is why bacterial cells, even though they have ribosomes, are not considered to have organelles. Okay, because they don't have any membrane-bound organelles. All right, so just looking over organelles that we've talked about in the past two sections. Okay, we have the cell membrane. It encloses the cell and is also relatively flexible. It is what's known as semi-permeable, so it will allow certain compounds to pass through it, which we're going to talk more about in the next section. You also have your cell wall, which is only found in plants, and then a version of it is found in bacterial cells. It encloses the cell membrane, and it is inflexible. So there are pores contained within cell walls that allow for nutrients to pass up to the cell membrane. You also have your central vacuole, which stores water in plant cells and also gives rigidity to the cell. And then you have your centrioles, which help in cell division, and they also move through flagella and cilia, so they're kind of weird little organelles. You have your centrosome, which produces microtubules that form the cytoskeleton, and they also contain the centrioles. You have chloroplasts, which carry out photosynthesis in plants. You have your cytoskeleton, which provides structure to the cells. It also acts as kind of the highway within the cell. You have your Golgi apparatus, which is kind of like UPS and the U.S. Postal Service combined. They process, sort, and ship proteins. And you have your lysosomes, which break down waste material in the cell. So it's kind of like the garbage disposal people. Continuing on, you have your mitochondrion. Of course, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. If you've been online any time in the past 20 years, you would know that. They do produce energy for the cell. You have your nucleolus, which is contained inside the nucleus, and it produces ribosomes. Then you have your nucleus, which contains DNA in the nucleolus. You have ribosomes, which produce proteins. And then you have your rough ER, rough endoplasmic reticulum, which has ribosomes kind of embedded in its surface, and it produces proteins for cell membranes or secretions. You also have your smooth ER, smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which does not have any ribosomes, and it produces lipids. Then you have vacuoles, which are storage containers inside the cell. Remember, animal cells will have several small ones, but plant cells will have one giant one. And then you have your vesicles, which are small sacs for transportation around the cell. Okay? And they generally will fuse with other membranes. Okay, so the plasma membrane, or they will fuse with like the Golgi apparatus membrane, things like that. So the way to kind of think about a lot of these, or like For example, if you think about a lysosome is just a vesicle with very specific enzymes in it. Okay, so all of these are membrane-bound sacs, except for the ribosome. Okay, they're membrane-bound sacs that just have different things inside of them, and those different things help them do their specific function. Okay, all right. So now, again, a refresher looking at the cell where they all are. Okay, so you've got your cell membrane, which is this pink part here. That would be number 11. You have your centrioles, okay, which are number 1 in this case, so it is referring to each of these like purple rods. You also have your centrosome, which is number 9 here, so it's referring to the complex with the 2 centrioles. You have your cytoskeleton, which is, let's see, what number is that? It's number 3 here. It's referring to these little tubes that are around the cell. Oftentimes you will see vesicles attached to them so that they can move around the cell a little bit easier. You have your Golgi apparatus. Okay, so that is right here, number 12. Lysosome is, I believe, number 2 here. Okay, so it has the digestive enzymes contained within it. And then you have your mitochondrion. So that is number 13. You see them all throughout here. The thing to remember about those is that they do have an inner and outer membrane. You have your nucleolus, which is the darker, denser region inside the nucleus, number 6. You have your nucleus, which is number 5. Remember, nucleus is bound by a membrane, okay, and it has pores in that membrane, the nuclear envelope, in order to allow passage of genetic material. Your ribosomes are these little dots. Okay, this depicts all of your ribosomes basically bound onto the rough ER, but you will have free-floating ribosomes in the cell as well. Okay, so that would be number 8. And then rough ER is number 7. You can tell it's usually found closer to the nucleus, and it also has the ribosomes in its surface. Then you have your smooth ER, which comes off of the rough ER. That's this orange network. It's number 10 here. Okay. Then you have your vesicles. Okay, so vesicles, I would probably say that's number 4. Some of this gets a little bit difficult to differentiate, so don't worry, we're not going to get that close into a lot of this. And then you also have your vacuoles, which would be number 14 for storage. Okay. Moving into the plant cell here. Cell membrane, again, that is just inside of the cell wall. Okay, so the cell membrane would be here. It's the pink part here. You have your cell wall, which is the green part on the outside. And then the central vacuole is relatively easy to spot here. It's number 2. Then your centrosome, again, contains your centriole, so that is depicted here. Number 10, it looks like. Chloroplasts are the green ones here. So that is number 1. And remember, these, again, do have an inner membrane as well. It is shaped very differently from what you see in the mitochondria, but we'll get into that more when we deal with photosynthesis. You do also have your cytoskeleton, okay, which is, I would say, number 5 here, which is showing the microtubules, the different, like, yellow rod-looking things. Then you have your Golgi apparatus down here in the corner, number 13. Okay, mitochondria is the kind of orangish red ones here, number 14. Nucleolus is, again, the denser region inside the nucleus. Number 7, nucleus is outside of it. Ribosomes, again, you have them attached to the rough ER, which is here. And then you have your smooth ER, vesicles, which are moving around the cell, these little things around here. And this is actually showing a small vacuole as well. Generally, you do not see those in plant cells, but it is technically possible. All right, so those are your organelles.